back to the Draft FC podcast, a podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another Gameweek preview, going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Gameweek 3. Some interesting football in Gameweek 2. Feels like there's so many viable players, in which I know at this stage, particularly for draft FPL, there often is, but it feels like there are so many midfielders and defenders who are in the conversation with waivers and etc. In large part, I think, due to the scoring and also the way some of the teams are already shaping up. So it's really fun, and it makes the content difficult because there's inevitably going to be players that I don't even acknowledge in this episode who you will be toying over in your waivers. That's what the comments are for. So if I do miss anything that you think's been a glaring omission that's going to impact your waivers this week, then do comment and I'll try and get back to you later on. The transfer window is still very much in play. We've got a few more days before that closes on Monday, and closes on Monday evening at 7 o'clock UK time. So following this weekend, so we've got a nice contained weekend of football, all of the matches played across Saturday and Sunday, because we then enter our first international break of the season, which means Game Week 4 will then be 2 weeks away, which kind of feel like I need a 2-week break already, given how tight and congested the pre-season content was. No thanks to FPL releasing the game so late, and then straight into Game Week 1, Game Week 2, and now Game Week 3. Yeah, I think having a little space to breathe is just what the doctor ordered, so I'm quite pleased about that. This will be much of the usual. I'm going to carry on with the talking point slide. We'll also mention a few of the new signings whilst that's still going on. And then I've also got another new section, which probably a section not really been feasible to do prior to this season, which you'll see towards the back end of the episodes. Keep your eyes peeled for that. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So, quick reminder at the top, the waiver deadline will be at the conventional time of Friday morning, 11 a.m. tomorrow, the 29th of August. I'm recording this on Thursday morning, with the main game week deadline happening on Saturday morning. The early Saturday kickoff is Chelsea against Fulham. We've then got a little handful of 3 p.m. games, including United and Spurs playing at home, plus a couple of fixtures, which I think lots of you will be targeting: Sunderland, Brentford, Wolves, Everton. Lots of availability in the waiver pile, and pretty difficult to call those games as it stands. Then got Leeds against Newcastle. Newcastle are in a bit of a sorry state in terms of who they're actually going to have available in their starting 11. Then Brighton against City. Lord knows how that will go, because we just don't know which Brighton is going to turn up these days. They could win that 3-0. They could lose it 6-0. Forest, West Ham. I think lots of us will be having a look at Forest assets, and indeed some of the picks later on in this episode will be veering that way. The biggest game of the weekend, Liverpool against Arsenal, and then Villa later on at home to Crystal Palace. Quite a few key injuries and suspensions, not least for my own draft team in my main league. Bukayo Saka came off with a hamstring injury in their last match. The murmurings are that it's nowhere near as bad as the one that ruled him out for much of last season, but certainly not going to see him I say we're certainly not going to see him this weekend. It would be the most Arteta thing in the world that they sneak him into the coach in a duffel bag and he's suddenly in the starting 11. But the expectation is that we're going to miss him for about 4 weeks. Now, because we're going into the international break, a lot of that will be absorbed. So it's not the worst time for him to have a few weeks off. We're looking at game week 5 or 6 for his return. But with any Arsenal injury, we don't have a lot of detail. Odegaard came off with a shoulder injury, but that's not expected to rule him out. Nouri came off with what looks like an ankle sprain in City's defeat against Spurs, probably looking at a similar length of time of absence to Bukayo Saka, if not a touch more, unfortunately. Palmer also came off with didn't start the game. He was taken off in the warm-up before the game, and with some sort of groin injury. Again, we don't have a huge amount of detail on that, but it doesn't sound that bad. Putting Ballard for Sunderland on the key injury list because his ownership absolutely rocketed last week, as we'll see. his injury sounds pretty significant, so we'll have to wait and see how long it's going to take him. Totti got sent off for Wolves, but that won't affect many of you. And Kamara came off with what looked like a nasty hamstring injury for Villa. Not a direct issue, though I'm sure a couple of you out there will have picked up Kamara for his possible defensive contribution points, but what that does to the team overall, which has already looked like it's struggling a bit, is probably the main thing to factor in. So the talking points from last weekend's results, and we'll start from that Friday night game, West Ham against Chelsea. Chelsea came away 5-1 winners in that. We've also had a handful of Carabao Cup fixtures for all the Premier League teams that were not involved in Europe. And even more of a damning indictment, I guess, is that West Ham construed a way to lose against Wolves, who arguably have looked even worse than West Ham have so far, although they're really fighting for that trophy. Things not looking good. I do not like how the squad is currently shaping up. I do not really like the starting 11, the midfield and the defence worry me a lot, and they are rightly getting touted as it stands as potential relegation fodder unless they're able to do a little bit of business between now and Monday. They probably need 5 bodies in. Realistically, they're not going to get 5. They might get 2, possibly 3 at a push. But yeah, the midfield and the centre-back crew that they've got, Tadaibo, Kilman, Aged and Mavropanos, to play a back 3, that is nowhere near strong enough. And if you have a peek at my current predicted lineups, I'm guessing, this is just a gut feeling because we've got nothing to go on, I'm guessing that Potter may move to a back 4 from the start in their game at the weekend, but we'll have to wait and see on that, because any 2 of their current midfielders I don't really think possess enough of the defensive characteristics, enough mobility to really get them through the majority of games. So one way to counteract that is simply to throw another body in there. Kind of what Spurs did all of last season. Just get another body in there who can run around or win the ball a little bit. So I wouldn't be surprised if Potts starts with Ward-Prowse and maybe Souček in there. Route 1 from all goal kicks. Wilson to start perhaps. Bowen off the right as we've seen in most of his career. We'll see. They need to do something. He needs to do something. They need a spark. Chelsea, obviously the main benefactor of Palmer disappearing before the game started was Esteval, who I thought looked really, really good. He's still a bit raw and rough around the edges. Still some times where he goes headfirst, chasing after stuff and taking people on where he possibly could be a little bit more decisive. But, you can't blame him for that. He's, 18, and he's been brought in to be that guy, that flair player. So, it was an exciting watch. I'm not 100% he will necessarily start the next match if Palmer doesn't. They've obviously got a lot of options there, but I can see why he's getting talked about in a lot of circles. I think if we get news that Palmer doesn't start, I'd say the odds of Esteval starting their game at home to Fulham probably 70-80%, and with the potential there with a very nice home game, I can see him being a very popular waiver pickup. Wolves are definitely in more trouble than I thought they would be, and not least because of the chat over the last couple of days that Newcastle are bidding for Jorgen Strand-Larsen. If he were to go now, they obviously wouldn't have a huge amount of time to replace him. They would be almost nailed on to go down. We were, I was high on Wolves. I thought that their squad, their starting 11 was better than a lot of people give it credit for. The things that have worried me over the first couple of games are that Joao Gomez and Andre have looked well off it, and they need to be bang up for it in order for Wolves to do well. And we're still seeing the likes of Bellegarde and Munetzi getting game time, which when those guys should be bench players and would struggle to get in the starting 11 for the majority of Premier League teams out there, including some of the newly promoted teams. So Strand-Larsen went. Really, really worried for Wolves. Dango or Ouattara, everyone's saying, Brentford, 45 million. They've overpaid for him. Absolutely not. They got a great deal. I'd happily loved Spurs to have paid 45 million for Dango Ouattara. I think he's got so much potential. The underlying numbers have been solid since he's arrived, no matter how much game time he's been given, whether that's from the start or whether he's been getting bench minutes. Just a head down, does as he's told, thoroughly efficient player. And you can already see how he's going to fit in there, basically taking over Brian Mbumo's role on the right side. We kind of saw him playing a bit of a hybrid role, as we've seen Brian Mbumo play, which sees him kind of slot in as a right wing back. So when they don't have the ball, he's filling in as a back five, and when they do have the ball, he's bombing right on in a front three almost. So yeah, it was nice to see him start straight away pretty much. So I've got no doubt that we'll continue to see that. And as I mentioned already, there is pretty attractive fixture there between Sunderland and Brentford, depending on which way you think that will go. And as we'll see, Ouattara for 18 leagues is firmly in hidden gem territory, which is criminal. And yeah, I'm sure will not be in hidden gem territory come Game Week 4. Gyökeres drafters feeling a lot more comfortable now after the kind of lethargic display we saw in Game Week 1. Obviously came away with a very nice haul in Arsenal's 5-0 win against Leeds, which, as I said, in pre-season, I predicted he would be a fine first or second round pickup, depending on your league size. I didn't have too much concern that he wouldn't find his feet relatively quickly. So there you go. Everton kick off life at the Hill Dickinson Stadium with an impressive win, it has to be said, over Brighton. Thoroughly deserved. Brighton looked pretty awful in that game. We saw Jorginho drop out in the squad for some sort of minor knock or injury, which again we've had very vague news about. The expectation is that he could be back this weekend. I was really, really impressed with Grealish. I've been generally ignoring him, and if people have been asking me, should I have player X or Grealish, I've usually been saying to pick player X. But yeah, no, he looked really, really good, and he'll be a mainstay in that starting 11. They've actually got a few options there. I've just signed Dibbling, which I'll touch on in a second. Njai looked good. Alcaraz, Dewsbury Hall, McNeil, of course, is still there as it stands. So yeah, we'll have to see which trio it settles on. But I think Grealish is 100% going to be one of them. I think it's going to be difficult to unseat Njai. And then it's sort of down to Dewsbury Hall or Alcaraz in the 10 role, with the others being a bit more support, is how I would see it moving forward. But yeah, I think Everton have got enough, and more than enough, going on there to do okay this season. Really good game on Monday between Newcastle and Liverpool. Obviously a lot of bite in that game, which then really fizzled out with Gordon's red card, which at the time I thought was, like, in the moment I thought, oh, that's a bit harsh. But then when you saw the replays, when you saw the stud marks on Van Dijk's leg, I don't think you can really complain at all. If that was a Spurs player, I wouldn't be complaining. It's a shame, as I say, they have now come away from that with Joel Linton injured, Tonali injured. I'm expecting Shah to miss out due to concussion protocol. Gordon's now suspended. Isak's still sitting on naughty step. So yeah, they'll have to put a bit of a makeshift starting 11, which will provide some opportunities because they go to Leeds in Game Week 3. So I'd still expect Newcastle to be more than competitive, regardless of who they put in that game. So keep an eye on my predicted lineup as we head towards the deadline, and as we get a little bit more news, hopefully, from Eddie Howe tomorrow in the press conference. And then the final point, and I'll be honest, I actually had this on even before last night's game against Grimsby, is just that Man United are really, really going to struggle over the next few weeks. They've got some tricky fixtures on paper, and I'm including Burnley at home, because if that was the kind of display they were putting up against Grimsby, I hold no hope they're going to be able to turn it around at home to Burnley. Burnley, of course, will be bang up for it, as Grimsby were last night. They then follow that up after the international break with games against City, Chelsea, and then away to Brentford. And I mean, let's face it, if they lose against Burnley, or if they draw in a fairly uninspiring fashion, then Amorim, I don't think, will be the manager by Game Week 4. He looks thoroughly done, as we've seen a whole slew of managers over the last few years. He's got that look about him, and that image, that little clip of him messing about with his tactics board on the bench in the rain, it really is pathetic. Really is. I mean, it's not to suggest that isn't a reasonable thing for him to be doing, but, you know, I feel like if I was stood on the touchline in that game, I've got a good enough working knowledge of the Man United squad and the 11 that I might have put out on the field to know how the formation could tweak slightly by making a few substitutions. I wouldn't need to get the whiteboard out and get the X's and O's drawn up. Almost, it just sort of looked like he was hiding, almost. I mean, we saw him hiding throughout the whole penalty shootout. And it's getting to that point where it's funny, and then you just start feeling sorry for him, which is not a good place to be if you're a United fan watching and listening to a rival fan such as myself talking about it in that nature. Let's do Waiver Watch, because we got our first proper mid game week to game week waivers process last week. So these were the main players coming in. We had Rico Lewis and Reinders right at the top, which I think, given how game 1 went, was fair enough. We had a lot of knee-jerk FC with Ballard and Mayenda coming in, and Doyle was a good pickup. O'Reilly should have been a good pickup, and then gave away the blimmin' penalty to Danny Welbeck. I brought O'Reilly in. I thought, you often get that sort of statistical little blips where a team will get a couple of penalties in back-to-back game weeks right at the beginning, and I thought, just got a feeling, especially with Everton's back line, I got a feeling that Brighton could get another penalty, which they did. And then to see Welbeck standing over it, I was delighted when he missed, but yeah, really annoying considering I brought in O'Reilly purely for that reason, and then he didn't take it. And Calafiori and Richarlison, good pickups too. The players making way, Jared Branthwaite, Paul Wan-Bissaka and Havertz at the top. Whole load of the City Pep Rouletters who've spent most of the opening weeks on the bench. And then Jacob Murphy, he looks thoroughly out of it and didn't even come off the bench in that game against Liverpool, which isn't that. I think he could have easily got a little run out. He's got good legs on him, and he's been a really good player for Newcastle over the last couple of years. So it's a shame to see him sidelined in quite this manner, in quite the speed that we've seen it happen. A quick look over some of the new signings that have come in over the last week or so. We saw Forest sign Callum Wendo. I'm not convinced he's even going to be backup striker. I think Igor Jesus is probably still going to be number 2 and the one who starts to encroach on Chris Wood's minutes most, but obviously they are playing Europa League football, so they need bodies. Calvert-Lewin had the most, if you haven't seen it, the most dreadful debut for Leeds in their Carabao Cup match on Tuesday. I forget who it was against now. They lost some penalties. Missed 2 or 3 sitters in the space of about 5 minutes to win the game, and then also missed his penalty in the shootout. As I say, I've touched on him a couple of times already. He's third choice forward at the moment, and I still think if Leeds are going to stay up, they need to sign a proper centre forward before Monday. Eze obviously has formally moved across to Arsenal. I'm going to try and evaluate that without letting personal feelings and Spurs bias get in the way. I think it's a really good addition to Arsenal as a football team. I think if you got Eze from draft day, it probably knocks him down ever so slightly in my rankings because he's not going to be the main man anymore. Can't guarantee he's going to start week in, week out anymore, but it could be that it goes the other way and he just is able to cash in because Arsenal are going to do like what they did to Leeds and win 5-0, which means there's plenty of scope for him to chip in with attacking returns rather than for Palace, where he was scoring and they were winning 1-0. And if he didn't score, then Palace didn't do particularly well. I know I'm oversimplifying that a little bit because, of course, Mateta and Sarr did very well last year, but you know what I mean. He was the talisman at Palace, whereas now he's a bit more of a medium-sized fish in a big pond. So we'll have to see how he adjusts to that. But it's not to say he's a bad pick and that you should be looking to trade him away. But when I do have a little play around with the rankings later on today, he probably will just nudge down a couple of spots. Douglas Luiz has joined Forest, which not sure Nuno really wanted, but I've no doubt we'll get some game time, and we know he can definitely chip in with some defensive contribution points, so will no doubt feature on the menu at times this season. Okafor joined for Leeds. He's kind of played across the front line. I'm fully expecting him to be their main left wing option. Obviously, they've been having to make do. We clearly do not want Jack Harrison playing there regularly, so we've seen Nonto covering out there. Now means they've got Nonto and James to compete for the right wing spot, which I actually think Nonto could get the edge there. So if you have got Dan James, probably a drop for me. And we did see Okafor. I believe he started that Carabao Cup match in midweek. I haven't seen any of the highlights or read any of the match report from that, apart from Calvert-Lewin's funny little highlight reel. So I don't know how he how he looked. Dibbling finally joined Everton. That was fairly big money, 40 odd million pounds. But I don't think he's going to be straight into the starting 11. He'll be a rotation option. And then Wolves signed a right wing back, Chachua. Possibly my favourite name in the game right now, Chachua. And yeah, we saw him come on due to an injury to, who was it, Hoover in the last match. And so I've got him penciled in to start the next game. Let's get into some of the main picks then. And starting with some defenders, Chalobah for Chelsea, still not high enough owned, considering I think he's going to play a lot of minutes for them this season. They've got a nice home game against Fulham. The two Spurs centre-backs, Van der Ven and Romero. Van der Ven, 49% in 18 leagues. Romero, 66%. So good availability for them. 2 clean sheets from 2. I think we're going to see, well, we must see a lot more clean sheets from Spurs this season than we did last year. With the likes of Sarr, Polinia, and Bentancur sort of shielding in front as well. Definitely a lot more room for clean sheets. And also with the way Spurs are valuing and prioritising set pieces during the games now, anything within the opposition half is getting punted into the box. Any throw-in anywhere near the 18-yard box is getting lobbed and launched into their Rory Delap style. So, yeah, and we've already seen them, be the benefactor of that a little bit. So, yeah, I think they're more than good enough to be in the rosters for somebody's team in an 8-team league. And then finally, Nico Williams is your easiest way into the Forest defence if you fancy that fixture at home to West Ham, and why wouldn't you? Carrying on that theme, you'll see from the list of midfielders this week, we've got a good handful of Forest players as well. Hudson-Odoi, Anderson and Ndoi, all owned in fairly low amounts across 8-team leagues. Ndoi is the most owned with 25%, Anderson 21%, Hudson-Odoi 13%. I would happily pick any of them up off the waivers for a short-term punt with that home game. Barnes for Newcastle is one of the few who is a pretty much nailed on to start that game against Leeds. Again, low ownership, and it is a game against Leeds. So even despite those changes, I expect Newcastle to do well. Esteval, we've mentioned already, he's available in 75% of 8-team leagues. And teammate Caicedo, we're also seeing doing very well with not just the defensive contributions, but also with the attacking contributions too. And yeah, a good fixture on paper. The 2 star men, Grealish, who are again already mentioned, he's been taken in about a third of 8-team leagues. And with their trip to Wolves and the state that Wolves are, not often that you see Everton going away and they're firm favourites. At least they are for me. I'm not quite sure where the bookies have got them. So yeah, again, Grealish I think is definitely good enough to be in somebody's midfield in an 8-team league. And then the last one who we saw come off the bench against Spurs is Rodri, whose ownership has dipped since draft day to below 50%. Not convinced he'll start this weekend. They may look to, give him another 20, 30 minutes off the bench, give him the international break to really recuperate, and then put him in the starting 11 for Gameweek 4. Either way, not the worst player to stash on your bench in anticipation for that, because I think if he starts to do what he did a couple of years ago, and which is a bit of everything, goals, assists, defensive contributions, clean sheets, obviously plays the majority of games, then he will be right up there in the final points tally come Game Week 38, and the sort of player that you could pick up now. He just never really leaves your team. And then a few forwards to mention. Muniz looks to be the starting forward again for Fulham, and we saw Jimenez start their midweek Carabao Cup game, so just makes Muniz starting again at the weekend against Chelsea even more likely. If you've got Jimenez, and I know inevitably there'll be people going, I've got Jimenez, should I drop him for Muniz? I hate doing those swaps because it's such a direct coin toss. And if, come Game Week 4, if Jimenez is starting again, it's just really annoying. But if I was really pushed, I think just given how important having starting forwards are, and knowing that even acknowledging the fact that we got burnt in this exact situation this time last year, I probably just about would swap Muniz for Jimenez if I had him. Definitely need to swap them over in the draft rankings later when I have a look. Thiago for Brentford started again. I don't know if did he get credited with the assist in the end, because he should have done for that Utara goal, but I don't think he did because of the way. No, he didn't. The way that goal was scored, obviously he shot, it was saved, came back to him again. I can't remember what the assist rules were this year. I thought they were being a bit more lenient, but he got the flick on for Uwatara, so he's a bit unlucky not to get his second attacking return in 2. For now, I think he's fairly nailed to carry on starting. The only thing that could scupper that is if come Monday, Johan Visser remains a Brentford player. We've already seen him kind of getting woven back into training and stuff. So if Visser happened to still be around come the end of Monday, then that would be a bit of a dent into his minutes, because similar to Isak at Newcastle, they would 100% have to start using him and working him in to some degree. But we'll have to wait and see. And then Barry for Everton looked really good in that game that they won at home to Brighton. And I fully expect him sooner or later to be the unequivocal starting number 9 for Everton, if that isn't the case already. Into hidden gems. So these are players with less than 10% ownership in 8-team leagues. Loads of options. I could have had reams of players, particularly in defence. Jed Spence is just in hidden gem territory still, 9.7% owned. And for now, I think he is the starting left back. Even if Udogie was fit, I think Spence has played more than well enough that he is above him. Tyrone Mings, if you want a bit of the Villa defence at home to Palace, we know they can stifle a game above anything else. Bradley came off the bench in Liverpool's game against Newcastle, but do you want a Liverpool defender with their game against Arsenal? I'm not necessarily going to be rushing there, but you may want him for the slightly longer term, knowing that Frimpong is going to miss possibly a couple more weeks after the international break as well. Toastin's still there if you want a bit of the Chelsea defence. And then if we're looking at those lower mid-table Saturday 3 p.m. games, O'Brien for Everton, I think will be nailed on to start if you want a bit of the Everton defence. And likewise, if you're going to back Sunderland in their fixture against Brentford, Reinildo has been pretty prolific for the defensive contributions already. Off the top of my head, I think he's got 19 or 20 across the opening 2 game weeks. Should be a fairly even game. So we saw lots of Brentford players get defensive contribution points last week. I think this could be a game where both sides are able to get, a handful of players with a couple of bonus points for that too. In midfield, again, really long list. As it stands, Sarr is the starting number 10 for Spurs. Everyone raving about his performance, which was excellent against City. But let's face it, that performance was man marking, chasing, pressing. Not really what you usually want from your number 10, which is creating forward passes, scoring, assisting. That isn't Sarr. He can pop up in these little moments where you don't even recognise who he is, but you're not going to get that for 38 game weeks. But if you're looking at a short-term pickup, given the fixture on paper, I would not put you off Sarr for the next week or two. But again, that will really, how long he stays in your team depends on what business Spurs do over the next few days. Damsgaard for Brentford. Yeah, nice fixture away at Sunderland in theory, and you expect them to do okay from an attacking sense. And he's got some good attacking options around him again. On the other side of the team sheet, Xhaka is there again, has been doing well for defensive contributions already for Sunderland. And I expect a good, busy, contested midfield game there. So, yeah, could be a good 3 or 4 pointer. Dewsbury Hall for Everton. Dango Uwatara, of course, for Brentford. In 18 leagues, is only just 3%. It's much, much higher as you go to sort of 9 and 10 team leagues. I think well out of hidden gem territory. But again, I think given the fee, given he was straight into starting 11, don't think there's too much doubt over his place in the team. And I think if you're in an 8-team league where across the league there'll be 40 midfielders picked up, he's more than good enough to be in there. And not least, if you're not convinced, it's a game against Sunderland. So even on a very short-term basis, I think you're happy to have him. On the forward front, we saw Fulkrug get subbed for Wilson at half-time. Now, I know that they've been clutching at straws a little bit, but I could easily see Wilson now being above Fulkrug. As long as Wilson stays fit, I think he could be above Fulkrug, which is a big blow to those of us that picked up Fulkrug as sort of a third striker option on draft day. We saw Asula come on and score for Newcastle. He looked lively. I think pretty much going to have to start in game week 3 due to the other absences. He'll probably be the starting number 9, so it makes him a good sort of short-term prospect if you're in average size leagues, and possibly a decent long-term option if you're in very large leagues where you are often scrapping for these kinds of forwards. And the last one, which really is, again, for those bigger leagues, is Zimas for Brighton. who scored a couple of goals in their Carabao Cup victory, either last night or the night before. And given the injury issues that Rutter and Welbeck can have, it may not be, again, many weeks before we see him getting some meaningful minutes in the Premier League. Then we come to our new little slide that I'm going to do this season, which is the Gameweek Fantastic Fours. So each week I will choose 4 players who I think could be safe, boring bets to get a 4-pointer. So, play 60 plus minutes and get a couple of points for their defensive contributions. So I've highlighted Senesi for Bournemouth. I think they'll be pretty busy away to Spurs. Likewise, Rodon at home to Newcastle. I think will still be pretty busy even with that depleted Newcastle team. And then in midfield, Riffer for Brighton and Adams for Bournemouth again. Given the nature of their fixtures, where they play and how their defensive contributions is racked up already, they are the ones, I think, if you're just looking at some fairly uninspiring options, if you're happy with your team otherwise, if you're looking at a head-to-head matchup and thinking that you're reasonably well matched, but you do with just a safe 4-pointer from someone, then these are some of the guys I think you should consider. And what I'll try and do is track these as well as the season progresses, sort of the average points tally that our Fantastic Fours come away with week to week. But yeah, let me know what you think about this. I just think given the way the sort of meta of the game is moving, this could be quite useful and the sort of players that we're often going to be looking for. If you're looking to make room, these are really a lot of the same players I was talking about last week. A whole handful of goalkeepers that are still much too highly owned. Some of the City and Arsenal defenders still too highly owned, in my opinion, given the wealth of options out there. And the same kind of list for the midfielders and the forwards. The predicted lineups, I've done a Passover already this morning. Could be a couple of tweets, so that's been continues from the press conferences, but have a look at those if you're not sure who to pick up. And of course, if you're a member at Draft SC, then the predicted lineups are fully tuned into your league. So not only will you be able to see the lineups, you'll be able to quickly see which players are available and which players are taken by you and your rivals already. So that's it for this episode. A reminder, the summer transfer window closes on Monday, 1st of September at 7 o'clock British summertime. We do have 2 weeks off, as I said, between now and Gameweek 4. We'll see how I feel about doing a bit of a wrap-up transfer window episode in the interim. I may just take the 2 weeks off, to be honest, so I'm not going to promise you anything, but if you see a video drop, and of course, watch it. And on that note, make sure you are subscribed. Click the little dingly bell and you'll get notified if and when any videos do drop. Give us a thumbs up. Of course, comment any of your waiver dilemmas down below and I'll endeavour to reply to all of you before the deadline tomorrow morning. If you're listening on the audio, then give us a follow on whichever podcast platform you are listening on. And of course, if you haven't already, then go and check out draftfc.co.uk. We've got all sorts there for engaged draft managers, live game week scoring, waiver stats that you'll see me reference in these videos, your league global ranking, league analytics, loads of stuff in there. And of course, you get access to our thriving Discord channel and community, which I think is almost worth it as much as the site. And of course, you support the content that we do. So we'll leave things there in the interest of time. And until next time, stay sure.